Hello.
Our story begins with a mistake on Geonosis. In the heat of a true battle, the first major conflict Anakin had experienced since Naboo, he made a slight error of position. He properly guided Padme to one of the gunships, as he continued to weave his emerald lightsaber between his body and the blaster bolts intended to kill him. As Anakin was working through his defensive motions, he helped a clone into a gunship, and followed them in. His eyes remained transfixed on the battle droids that continued to drop per every deflection, and the vessels lifted out of the arena and slid towards the battlefield that was the entire planet of Geonosis. This, truthfully, was Anakin's first real battle since Naboo. He had of course fought in conflicts, but battles weren't common for Jedi to fight in. Skywalker and Kenobi dealt with street thugs and pirates and skirmishes. Hundreds to thousands of battle droids were not the typical appetite, but he was calm and collected. Something about the thrill of conflict made him lock in and gave him a surreal sense of battlefield vision. When Anakin turned back to see if Padme was alright, he realized she wasn't inside the same ship as him. Obi-Wan and the Senator were adjacent to them, but he couldn't do anything about that. Anakin wasn't with any other Jedi generals, simply alone. He told the clone pilots to pursue Obi-Wan's ship, and they abided by his commands. As the LAATs trekked across the Geonosis desert, flying above explosions and thousands of troops meeting each other for the first time, Skywalker's vessel was redirected. A duo of Geonosian pilots intended to knock Kenobi and Padme off course collided with the wing of his gunship, but it didn't destroy it, it just knocked them loose. The clones inside the ball cannons fired green beams of light at the bugs, killing one of them, as the other spun out of the way and started to pursue them. As they ripped through the flats, they approached a rock area, one where an entirely new side of the campaign became visible. The assault on Geonosis was much bigger than just the desert operation under the cover of acclimators and droid control ships. Anakin watched Obi-Wan's LAAT vanish from sight. The Jedi Master, without his apprentice, would not aim right above the fuel cells, and instead, their gunship would be fully prepared to fire rockets at the Countess Sereno, the executioner of Jedi. Kenobi ordered a pursuit, and Padme prepared to end the war before it could ever begin. Anakin could only hope that they dealt with Dooku as need be. He believed in Obi-Wan's skills as a duelist and a negotiator. Anakin grabbed a hold of the handlebars before he could be flung out the side of the gunship. The ball cannons continued to rip at the Geonosian fighter behind them, but to no avail. The further they got down the Republic battle line, the closer they got to entering enemy territory. The Geonosian fighter finally landed a hit, sending the gunship out of the sky. Anakin told the clones to brace, which they did, but most of them wouldn't survive the run. Skywalker, as soon as they collided with the ground, saw nothing but darkness. Obi-Wan and Padme landed safely on the platform, with a couple clones escorting them. The gunship wasn't trailed and it landed, enforcing Obi-Wan's aspirations to capture Dooku and end the conflict without chaos. He and the Senator rushed into the cave where he was currently hiding in. Tyrannus didn't really care that he was being trailed, but he was surprised when he looked up to see Obi-Wan being so bold. The Senator and the 4 clones with her raised their weapons, taking up positions behind Obi-Wan. The Jedi Master told Dooku to stop this destructive path. Qui-Gon would have never asked for this, and Tyrannus chuckled. He nodded to his droid, which rushed inside the Solar Sailor and prepared the engines. Obi-Wan told the clones to disable the vessel. He would deal with Dooku. He stepped forward, igniting his lightsaber, and Tyrannus shook his head, telling his grand student that this was beyond unwise. Kenobi was getting frustrated with Dooku's desire to talk down to him. He didn't even have the honor to meet him as Qui-Gon's student. Now he wanted to lecture him. How ignorant. Kenobi raised his weapon and offered an ultimatum. It wasn't important because Dooku wouldn't take it. He watched the clones rush towards his vessel and he raised his hand. Obi-Wan, utilizing Form 4, moved in, catching Tyrannus by surprise, before he could electrocute and therefore kill these Jango Fett clones. Their sabers collided. Mullet 1 Kenobi was doing everything he could to end the war, which was admirable, just not worth his time. Dooku parried easily and shoved his opponent back with little struggle. He enjoyed this, staring down at Obi-Wan with his signature look of superiority. As a clone started laying explosives against his vessel, he got irritated. Dooku drove his saber forward, but Obi-Wan was still acting on Form 4, instead of relying on his mastery of Form 3. Without Anakin nearby, Obi-Wan didn't have to worry about protecting his student, just providing enough time for the clones to disable the shuttle. Dooku batted Kenobi's strikes, swinging under him and spinning away. Tyrannus used the Force to shove Obi-Wan to the ground, before turning his back on his opponent to burn the clones. Electricity covered their backs, and they cried out in pain as Padme fired a shot into Dooku's abdomen. The clones were already on the ground, and as Tyrannus prepared to kill the senator, he ducked. Obi-Wan swung over Dooku's head and turned back, telling Padme to detonate the ship and get out of here. Tyrannus could feel the moment rising. This was do or fail. The injured Dooku jabbed his saber at Obi-Wan, forcing him backwards as Padme behind him tried to activate the detonation devices, but one of the clones was laying limp on top of the device. Tyrannus winced but pushed through the pain, using it as an ally, before jabbing his weapon across Obi-Wan's arm and cutting his leg, before firing electricity into his grand student, and sending him to the ramp of the Solar Sailor unconscious. Dooku used the Force to pick up Padme and Force choke her. He then shook his head, telling her that he had enough of her idealistic nonsense. As the words came out, he paused with a smile, electrocuting her and knocking her out as well, before deciding that these two had more worth to him alive. Within the next few minutes, Tyrannus was abandoning Geonosis with 2 new prisoners for his master's grand plan for Skywalker. On the other side of the battlefield, a clone commando opened up the door of the LAAT and helped out one of the regs before waking Skywalker up and pulling him out too. The clone referred to him as General, not knowing that the Padawan braid didn't make Skywalker much more than a field commander. For whatever reason, the non-combat experienced Jedi Order was given the reins of the clone army at the Battle of Geonosis. And for whatever other reason, the Republic sent a staggering 10,000 commando units to this battlefront. It was a stupid decision by some Kaminoan tactician that the Jedi would pay the price for. The commando told Skywalker that their troops were getting slaughtered. At this point in the battle, a tenth of all commandos deployed were dead or missing. They were ordered to engage as the rest of the clones were, a frontal assault, which was really stupid all things considered. Commandos may have had better armor or more elite weaponry, but they weren't trained for head-on field combat. Their operations were meant to be recon, behind enemy lines, or undercover missions, not frontal assaults. Anakin could hear the frustration, and he promised the commando that they would fix this together. There was a central command post back a click away, and Skywalker asked for the battle line. Thanks to the rock formation on this part of the planet, the lines were much easier to draw. The commando pointed everything out and Anakin nodded his head. This was his do-or-die moment. He could mess this up severely, because he was 19 years old, given command of 10,000 troops by accident, or he could fix this problem. Anakin told the commando to take the reg back to the command post and give him a central communication relay through the comlink, which the commando immediately provided Anakin. Skywalker then promised to rally all the troops up at a spire rock formation just north, about a click and a half away from what it looked like. The clone quickly followed his directive and helped his brother back to the command post. Anakin ignited the green saber once more and began his run. The desert was hot, but he was built for it. Years of life spent on Tatooine helped him hone his stamina for such a battle. Anakin admittedly was concerned for Kenobi and Amidala, but at this point he needed to help the clones under his command, regardless if it was ethical or not. He ran between lines of fire, and on his move he helped clones out of terrible situations. A squad or two were pinned down by B-2s, and he slung his saber through their hips and freed the clones. Thus, Anakin was then followed by groupings of commandos. He led these men naturally and felt at home in the arms of command. Anakin right now was not a Jedi Padawan. He was a field general and he was saving lives. Wounded men were helped by their brothers, who carried Bacta, as others followed Anakin in providing cover and support. Before Anakin ever reached the natural spire, he was able to get in contact with all 10,000 clone commandos in the area, or those that were surviving. It may have not been his most effective strategy, but it saved lives, which is what he wanted to do. There were some miscellaneous squads across the battlefield that were doing some more recon work, like Delta Squad, but overall, most of the clones under his command were sent to the front lines to die. His command unit was also much larger than just commandos. There were several hundred regs in the area too, but most of them were split up, so it was highly unfavorable for everyone involved. Even though the chain of command came naturally to Skywalker, he was far from a perfect leader on the battlefield. His strategy put a strain on the Republic assault, but he protected his men with his own body and his life. This may have not earned him favorability with commanders overseeing this assault, which didn't consist of a ton of Jedi, but it did earn him a lot of respect, admiration, and undying loyalty from the men he protected. The Battle of Geonosis would be an overwhelming Republic victory, even with the tension created on their assault from Anakin's move. However, the original casualty count for the commandos, which would have been near 5,000, was reduced to only 1,400, meaning that around 400 men died under Skywalker's command. Not to say that their deaths were his fault, but as any good commander, he took them as his fault, and he promised the men that he served with that if he ever had the chance to lead them again, he would not fail them as he had here. None of the commandos, regardless of what squad or unit they came from, blamed him though. This didn't change Anakin's mindset around the battle, and it certainly didn't help that his two closest friends and love interest, Obi-Wan, Padme, had been captured. Anakin wanted to focus on this, but after Geonosis, the Jedi Council immediately brought him back to Coruscant. Rumors traveled fast. He was a hero, and it didn't help that Palpatine was very prideful of this future apprentice of his. Inside the council chambers on Coruscant, the Jedi Council promoted him to knighthood. He was in a similar situation as Obi-Wan was following Naboo. They didn't want to think that Senator Amidala or Master Kenobi were dead, but they had to assume the worst. However, there was something else. The Jedi Council initially planned on giving Skywalker an apprentice, but due to the survivors of Geonosis being overwhelmingly commandos and having a much more important voice amongst the clone ranks, Anakin was being offered a formal position. The High Council was worried about it, but in an effort to build rapport with the clone army and maintain a firm grip on Skywalker without losing him to adventure, they gave him the choice to oversee all clone special forces. After being knighted, Anakin was really shocked. He didn't expect it, but he was grateful for the position offered. The council did inform Anakin that he'd be getting support. Jedi Masters Imogundi and Plo Koon would be there to guide him, and Colonel Meber Gascon had expressed interest in aiding the young Jedi Knight if he did take the role. Master Windu was especially suggestive that Anakin didn't need to feel burdened by this request, because it was a huge undertaking. But he did promise that while they searched for his friends, they would be here to support him. This was their way of telling him that he had proven himself temporarily. This position, of course, would give them the chance to watch his every move, especially with Plo Koon's position on oversight, but it was a chance to prove himself to a greater degree that he was a capable Jedi. Anakin, without giving much thought to it, took up the position. The following few days for Anakin would be filled with briefings. Republic admirals and generals were giving him tons of information and credentials. He was honored publicly. He was also a no-show for that event, and he got to know the Jedi and leaders he'd be working with. Meber Gascon, more than anything, was a comfortable drill sergeant, someone who could whip the clones into fighting condition, which is something Skywalker appreciated. Meber, most likely, from this point, felt like the individual that'd be his greatest guide. But something that started to bother Anakin about this new position and rank was what little it entailed for him. He was given an office on Coruscant like some bureaucratic negligent senator. He hated it. So much so, he looked out the window to see if he'd survive the fall. So by the end of his first week as director of the CSF, he decided to challenge those above him, which did include the High Council and the Chancellor. In a broad meeting, before missions were assigned to commandos, Anakin confronted the most powerful leaders in the Republic. All he wanted was a base of operations for the clones. If Clone Special Forces, or CSF, were to be productive at all, then they needed an operative base. Colonel Gascon was a hard-ass in need of territory to instruct the troops. Master Plo and Gundy could also be more efficient if they didn't operate out of some facility on Coruscant. It was stingy. The truth is, Palpatine was using the CSF as the building blocks for the future ISB. So he had just gotten the building permits to construct the CSF facility just beyond the Senate District. He was very against the idea, but the Jedi Council actually encouraged it. This was a war. They needed to be most efficient versions of their troopers. So, Anakin was given the budget to find a base of operations for his CSF, and do it discreetly. Anakin, at this, just smiled and bowed before leaving. The power hadn't gone to his head, but he was a lot more confident than he would be otherwise. With CC 5576-39, his squad, Colonel Gascon, and Master Gundy, Skywalker would begin his hunt for territory. He chose a very specific location too. Using star charts provided by Jocasta Nu, Anakin chose a territory that once belonged to the Jedi. The Yavin system, just off the Hydian Way, inside the Gordian Reach, was just where he wanted a base of operations at. Strategically, it was great, because it was close to important systems like Saleucami, Mandalore, Kashyyyk, Mod Calamari, and the corporate sector where Bonadan was. However, there was a more important reason Skywalker chose Yavin, eventually Yavin 4. It was because not more than a couple systems away, between Torpra and Mantreo, was Sereno. If Obi-Wan and Padme were still alive, Skywalker could set his plans for revenge up, right here. Luckily for Anakin, he did get backing from Palpatine for this operation eventually. The Republic was borrowing billions of credits for the war, and the CSF got its own budget, because the young director needed to impress the masses. Again, this was how Palpatine would establish the ISB. It was the perfect way to enable trust between the group and the populace. Even further, if Yavin became a temporary home that no one knew about, then he could use it for other, more experimental projects, like he planned to use Mount Tantus at Wayland for. The aforementioned squad Anakin took with him would confirm Yavin 4 and its ancient temple grounds to be the perfect location to set up shop. Clone Commando Commander Gregor and his squad helped position all the initially necessary command tables and communication relays. Anakin, Gascon, and Imogen D would use their cruiser's command console to watch every single already allowed mission at this current point. The CSF wasn't just for clone commandos. It included ARC troopers, experimental units, ARF scouts, and some other various minor groups of clones. Most of these initial missions included commando and ARC units. The vessel they used to get here was a bit large for the squad, but it had enough basic materials to help them set up everything. The Consular Light Cruiser was also equipped with various regs to help Gregor's squad with all the heavy lifting. More than anything, Gregor was putting everything into position to be best accessible for everyone. They would spend about 3 days on Yavin, before more Republic troopers would be shipped from Coruscant and Camino to join them. Thanks in part to their secret location, the Separatists weren't able to spot them coming or going. Unless they directly left the Gordian Reach and entered Separatist territory with anything larger than a shuttle, then they wouldn't be caught. These were commandos though. They were intelligent enough to not get captured. The next few months would be filled with tons of troop movements. The help of Imogen D and Colonel Gascon were major benefits to Anakin's stay as CSF director. He wasn't told what to do per se, but he was guided with their experience. Plo Koon had some other problems, and he had to be switched out for Adi Gallia following a near-fatal experience in the Abrogado system. Even though Ahsoka wasn't Anakin's student, she was Kit Fisto's, and that saved the survivors' lives. Speaking of the Malevolence, Masters Tin and Windu would be equally as responsible for his destruction. Anakin's position on Yavin 4 was a bit challenging. He infrequently saw action. As a director, he wasn't necessarily permitted to deal with combat exclusively on a personal level. It bothered him a bit because he wasn't getting as far as he would like as fast as he'd like. Yet the operation he was running was very successful. To add to the now 15,000 troopers under his command were 4 temple guards sent to his outpost. Skywalker requested them from Sindralik so that he could continue to hone his own skills. In his mind, even though it was not the main directive of the Republic, he was training to kill Count Dooku. Every week, these temple guards would be cycled out, so Anakin dealt with varying levels of talent, lightsaber forms, and styles of combat. Every day he'd train in the morning, afternoon, and in the evening. When he wasn't doing that or eating, he was strategizing. Because of Colonel Gascon's position on Yavin, many clones were sent to join them and train with them. While the facility itself wasn't the nicest place in the galaxy, like Camino, the amount of foot traffic it saw aided them with tidying up the base more efficiently. The Yavin Sanctuary, as they called it, was home away from home. Even though the colonel was a drill sergeant, and even though he worked the clones as hard as he could, they were permitted to enjoy themselves in the evening. Games of sabacc, betting on pod races with rations or credits, and wrestling matches were very common. Anakin ran a really tight ship. Operations were overseen with precision, accuracy, and attention to detail. But every clone had a part to play in every mission, so he figured he might as well give them time to enjoy themselves at home on Yavin, which he did partake in as well. When the first year of combat came to an end, the CSF was one of the most efficient branches of the clone military. Though, even with Plo returning to their camp, Anakin had a major problem. Due to his position as director, he was forced to interact with various Republic captains and admirals. These included the likes of Coburn, Yularen, and of course, his least favorite, Tarkin. Gascon wasn't very fond of Wilhuff either, but he just encouraged Anakin to try and keep an easy mind around him. Tarkin was a bastard in Gascon's words. Everyone agreed, but it was just best to let him be his jury old self and move on. Anakin, though, with encouragement from Gascon, would petition the Chancellor to make the CSF entirely clone and Jedi run, aside from Gascon. Palpatine didn't really like this, and because Skywalker's efforts as a military director had been paraded around since Geonosis, he was in a tough position. Sidious knew that he needed people to favor Anakin less as a Jedi and more as a Republic director, so he eventually caved, allowing Anakin to keep his operation entirely clone-based. This didn't mean that Anakin wouldn't cooperate with Republic officers, it just meant his priority was to the clones. Officers were third-tier information receivers. If the commandos needed them, then they would be involved. If not, they didn't need to know. Part of this choice came because Anakin was tired of Republic bureaucracy that went all the way from the Senate down to officer rankings, but also because he wanted to avoid chances of a rat within their system. Yavin needed to be protected at all costs. Though even after a year of progress, a 97% success rate on missions, and ever-increasing trust from the High Council, Skywalker was left unsatisfied. This was firstly because the war had not come to a conclusion yet, but also because he yearned to find his friends. Recent intel had been intercepted from a long-range communication relay on Yavin that Obi-Wan and Padme had just been removed from the Citadel and sent back to Sereno. Anakin didn't know much more than that, but he was frustrated. He couldn't do anything without endangering their lives. But because Tyrannus didn't know about the Yavin base, he could at least hold out hope. He now knew his friends were still alive, and that was half the battle. A few weeks into the new year, though, there were problems that arose after a generational successful mission. Anakin's CSF had been hunting for General Grievous since almost losing Plo Koon in the early parts of the first year of combat. Well, a combined unit of Omega Squad, Gregor's boys, the Molinus 10, and the Bad Batch on their second mission ganged up on the droid general and killed him. Initially, the CSF planned to do this on a joint operation between clones and Jedi, but Omega Squad caught into Grievous's whereabouts by accident. Anakin, as a note, in the years since gaining command, did accompany various squads on combat missions. He just didn't do it very frequently, due to his position of leadership. It's why this was meant to be a joint mission until they had to act on it. The clones understood why he wasn't as involved, and they respected that he joined them as frequently as he tried to. Much of the CSF operations were boosted because of their expansive budget, thanks to Palpatine trying to give Anakin some extra opportunities for public relations. Well, both of Anakin's new problems originated from different causes, but collapsed on Anakin's back at the same time. The squad that took out Grievous efficiently did the job. Not one single squad was fully lost. They each lost members, but not the whole squad. Only one of those squads did return to the Yavin Sanctuary as the others went elsewhere. Gregor's boys came back to Yavin. They then reported to Anakin that the captives he'd been searching for had always been on Sereno. Dooku was hoping to lure Skywalker out into a straight fight and kill him. The director wasn't very enthused with this sentiment from Tyrannus, because it was clear his opponent, who had never met him before, was very afraid of him. This wasn't the problem though. Dooku had used these clones as trackers. Every single unit that pounced on Grievous was tracked. The important one was Gregor's unit, because they went to Yavin. Tyrannus was basically using Grievous as a tactical distraction. He wasn't supposed to die, but it wasn't the worst thing ever if he did. On top of the fact that Dooku knew where they were, which he didn't know about, was Anakin's rising distrust for Palpatine. The Chancellor had just publicly outed the Jedi Council for reluctance towards Republic officers and the CSF. Palpatine specifically blamed the High Council for this. The hope was to divide Skywalker and the Council, but Palpatine underestimated how much trust was shared between both parties. More than anything, this unified Skywalker and the Council versus the Chancellor. Though there was a problem because of this urgent news. Anakin and the squad were unprepared when Colonel Gascon, on top of R2, rolled into the command center to inform everyone they were under attack. Air raid sirens blared as the few clones stationed on planet evacuated. Skywalker and his boys used underground tunnels installed following their deployment to Yavin to hide away. The forests of the planet concealed every escape craft they needed. The clones who rushed into the forest weren't seen by the Separatists. Even those who didn't make it to the ships, the tunnels, or the tree line were left in the chaos of the ensuing orbital bombardment. Skywalker and his command crew were, within minutes, buried under the mountain of stones that held the ancient temple together. Dooku stood on the bridge of the Separatist cruiser, and ordered for fighters to take out the escaping clone shuttles. But most of the 143 clones on base that made it to their starcraft would escape the system. Dooku continued the bombardment for an extra lick of time, before leaving and returning to Sereno. Within the next few hours, the High Council and the Chancellor would learn of Skywalker's death on Yavin 4. The other, now 20,000 clones across the galaxy under Anakin's command, would take their time to mourn his apparent death, including the likes of Commander Gregor and Colonel Gascon, who also died on Yavin. There were 4 temple guards with Anakin when the sanctuary fell. Emancipation and Plo were not there either, due to taking up other responsibilities thanks to Anakin's success as a military director and trust with the Council. Sidious was furious. He hadn't actually ever been this mad in his life. When he did interact with Tyrannus, he displayed a calm demeanor, and his apprentice pretended to be surprised by this revelation. Well, there were a few minor changes that would come from this. Separatist Senator Avi Singh had been lured into Palpatine's camp. He'd be taking up a much more important role in the Confederacy. Soon, Maul would return, which was beyond Palpatine's control, but before he could get to him, there'd be a problem for Maul. Because Maul decided to announce to the galaxy that he wanted Kenobi, and Obi-Wan was currently trapped, the Jedi Order sent Mace Windu, and the 2 brothers were not in the slightest prepared. The Jedi decided that it'd be dumb to just let Maul get away with murdering innocents, so Master Windu demolished Savage and Maul, inadvertently preventing Sidious from gaining a new apprentice. Before that ever happened though, Palpatine made a journey across the galaxy to make sure Tyrannus paid for everything. The Sith apprentice would meet his master at the mouth of his castle, and he'd be flung back through the chambers. Inside the main corridor were Obi-Wan and Padme, linked up in a prison together. They were fed whenever he felt like it and taken care of infrequently. When Dooku slammed into the floor, they were shocked, but then the Dark Lord of the Sith, with his maroon robes, stepped through, and before Dooku could react, he was force-choked. Sidious didn't even want to enjoy beating his apprentice in a duel. He wanted him to feel his life drain away. Sidious didn't even notice the prisoners, and he wrapped the sabers around Dooku's neck in an X formation, and once the life was almost pulled out of his body, the weapons dragged across each other, removing the Count's head in one slow and painful move. He then realized he was being watched, a little awkward, but Sidious didn't totally hate the idea of having useful prisoners. He didn't have a clue what he'd use them for, but he ordered Tyrannus' super tactical droid to take better care of them. He might use them for something else, and the droid nodded. The Dark Lord, now without Tyrannus, Grievous, and eventually Maul, would need to plan around a new apprentice. The galaxy was not out of his grips yet. He just needed to trust that Avi Singh would be the right man to do the wrong things. As for Dooku's motivations, they were left unknown. Sidious didn't know if he meant to kill Skywalker or not. All Dooku said is that he found an underground network of clones and wanted to dispatch them. At the Yavin sanctuary, Anakin and the survivors finally crawled their way out from the tunnels. They had limited air, but used some controlled explosions to work their way out towards air. A few other squads returned to Yavin to search for them, which wasn't allowed in their orders, but they broke them anyways because Anakin would have for them. Many of these clones were alive because Anakin went around protocol to save them himself, or with other groups of elite troopers. They owed him this much. When Anakin, Gascon, R2, and Gregor emerged, they were pretty badly wounded and relatively sickly. But the Bacta tanks inside the original Consular light cruiser, which had been hidden inside the forest, would provide everything they might need. The vessel, piloted by the men of Delta Squad, would take them off of Yavin 4 and plant themselves near one of the other Yavin moons, so that they could maintain their operation in secrecy. Operational command over the CSF went to Plo Koon and Ima Gundi, who shot down attempts made by the Chancellor to shift power into Tarkin's hands. The future ISB could not be so connected with the Jedi, but these bids for control made the Council even less trusting of the Chancellor much earlier. They did make multiple cases before the Senate because of this, and the new Senator of Naboo, Padme's royal successor, would stand on behalf of the Jedi Order. The Senate was semi-divided on this issue. Typically, they allowed Palpatine to go unchecked, but because the CSF had been so professionally operated by the Jedi, under Skywalker's command, they believed it was unnecessary to switch leadership. In their opinion, there wasn't much a reason to do it. If it wasn't broke, why fix it? Palpatine was in a bind because of something his apprentice didn't. But this created a unity between the Jedi and the Senate. Even further, Anakin requested total secrecy about their survival. He was the last of the survivors to enter a Bacta tank, because he watched the Senate discuss these dealings. This, along with Dooku's apparent death, had Anakin questioning everything. Something was terribly off about this. Avi Singh was a great case for them to study, and because he wasn't a Sith, At least as far as they knew, the Bad Batch was sent to capture him and question him about his rise to power. Due to not being imbued with the powers of the Force, it'd be an easy capture, and the information which returned to CSF HQ and the Yavin system was even more concerning. Masters Plo and Gundy questioned Clone Force 99 for their motives, but they didn't reveal anything. They weren't snitches, and despite their better judgment, Plo and Ema covered it up for the time being. Avi Singh was also returned back to his home world. Palpatine didn't need to know why the leader of the Separatists was captured, especially if the Jedi themselves didn't know either. Anakin, Gregor, Gascon, R2, and Delta sat around a table conversing about what didn't make sense. Connecting all the dots from their perspective, it looked as if the Sith reacted to Dooku's attack on their base. Their answers kept circulating around the same individual, but no one wanted to say it. From the instant death, the attempts to prop Skywalker in the spotlight, Republic officers close to him intermingling in their affairs, and his post-Yavin attack positions, had these men coming to the resolution that Palpatine, in some form, was behind the war effort. They didn't necessarily think Sith Lord off the bat, not even Skywalker, but political mastermind was their thoughts. There were very few people that could potentially be this much of a threat. Skywalker then suggested that they move their operations to Sereno, to find out one last thing. During their trip through hyperspace, Anakin would get his relief inside the Bacta tank, which healed up any remaining wounds or injuries. Anakin called this a volunteer mission only, but everyone wanted to join him. Gascon would not because of his size, but they were going to Sereno to see if Kenobi and Amidala were still alive. Everyone knew this was a personal mission for Skywalker, hence their rationale for joining him. But even further, this did align with their interest in the potential of Palpatine being a traitor. Theoretically, they came to the conclusion that if Palpatine had killed Tyrannus, then he might let the others live because they could be valuable assets for his own aspirations. Not in relation to Skywalker, but forcing the Separatists to look like warmongers. This was a long-time mission that the CSF had been undergoing. It was initially started by Gascon to keep an eye on the Senate, and it eventually moved to Palpatine when he received more executive powers. Their biggest concern was that Palpatine was trying to corrupt the Republic and go deeper into war. Regardless, upon their landing, in the forests outside of Castle Sereno, an injured Skywalker followed behind Commander Gregor. He was the highest-ranked commando in the CSF. He led the boys down the hill. There were a few guards on station, but thanks to Sev, they were dealt with relatively quickly. Gregor, Scourge, and Fixer breached the doors, and Anakin cut down the super tactical droid in the way, before they found their captives. Obi-Wan and Padme were safe. A little malnourished, but they were still alive, and that's all that mattered. Two medics, including Fixer, planted some nutrition needles into their arms, and they also gave some adrenaline shots, but at a reduced dose. Even though Kenobi and Amidala wanted to share a moment with their friend and saviors, they were more concerned about the facial outline of their new captor. Anakin helped them both up, and they explained everything the clones needed to know. Skywalker became filled with rage and fury, but he helped his friends escape the castle and get them through the forest and up to their starship, before abandoning Sereno. Instead of heading straight to Coruscant, a secret dispatch was sent to the Jedi Temple, using CSF frequencies, which only the Jedi and the clones had access to. It was specifically created by commandos, ARFs, and ARCs to keep things secretive. This was the Secret Service after all. No need to have politicians knowing what they really did by telling people to fight wars for them. The spineless, decadent creatures that served the Senate didn't have the courage to know what they were doing with their words. Anakin's hologram showed up in front of Plo and Ema Gundy. They weren't as surprised as Anakin thought they'd be, but he informed them of everything. Kenobi and Amidala were saved, but the Chancellor was likely the Sith Lord. Plo asked for some rationale, and it was given. Some of it was the facial outline, other parts were the voice, and the rest was what the CSF, in their absence, came up with. Plo then asked if they were activating Operation Emancipation. Anakin nodded his head. The two Jedi quickly got to work. Operation Emancipation was a work of art created by the CSF in case the Chancellor was in fact a Sith Lord, and/or had more influence than not. It was designed to treat the entire Chancellor's office as separatist loyalists. This op, also thanks in part to Plo being in the CSF, gave the Jedi Council full Republic legislation and power to act on behalf of the government, people, and Grand Army of the Republic. This was the only benefit Anakin gained from working so closely with Republic officers before stopping that. He created this because of Tarkin, because he might be a Separatist loyalist, and Palpatine never actually approved of it, but the Senate won 2/3 majority to outvote him, because if there were Separatists behind their lens, then they might as well be dealt with by the CSF. Palpatine hoped that it would never be activated, until the full present body of the High Council confronted him in his office, before he clocked out at night. Yeah, he wouldn't survive that. Clones in the CSF were also informed to start bugging every office of every senator and representative in the Republic. This was a political mission, more than anything, but it was to ensure the longevity and protection of the Republic itself from Separatist loyalists. Of course, the Senate was surprised and even up in arms, but they didn't fully grasp what giving this type of legislative power to the CSF did. It was never really intended to be used by the Jedi Council, but because it was given to Anakin's CSF, they were able to pardon any act the Council did on their behalf. It was a bunch of legal mumbo-jumbo framed into the bylaws. At the end of the day, the point is, the CSF could protect the Jedi, and the Order had just saved the Republic. Thanks to Padme being in prison for almost a full year and a half, Mina Bonteri was never assassinated, and when Padme returned, she helped the Senator of Naboo get in contact with Bonteri. Without Grievous, Sidious, or Tyrannus, there wasn't a soul to keep the war going. Those who did became immediate targets of the CSF, and while Avi Singh was handpicked by Palpatine, his role wasn't to keep the war from ending, it was to give the Separatists the best chance at succeeding. In this world, it meant signing a peace treaty. Avi had, since joining Palpatine, become resistant to him prior to his death, so it wouldn't have worked out anyways, based on who Senator Singh was as a person. The CSF, following Operation Emancipation and the fallout of everything else, relocated to the former Kaminoan colony at Borovio. A much similar outpost to the one at Yavin was created, and while it wouldn't see a ton of immediate use once the war papers were signed into peace treaties, the station would be in turn used against the criminal organizations of the Outer Rim. Director Anakin Skywalker would earn himself some medals he didn't care about, and become one of the most recognized Jedi Masters in the galaxy. Everyone called him a master, but at the age of 20, he wasn't, until the Council said, what the hell, he earned the rank, so they gave it to him. This now put him in a weird bind. The war was coming to a conclusion. New pro-clone bills were being enacted, and without the additional 5 million clones purchased by the Republic, there were more financial benefits for troopers wishing to retire or enter non-military positions in the working world. Though the CSF remained pretty consistent, because of the loyalty built by Skywalker, Plo, Ema, and Gascon. Also yes, Colonel Gascon got promoted to General, because he was just as influential as Anakin was. Truthfully, Skywalker wouldn't accept his medals unless Gascon got them, because at least Gascon would care about them. Director Master Anakin Skywalker had himself some choices to make. Most of his motivation in the past year and a half had been in saving Obi-Wan and Padme, which was ironic considering how easy it was once Dooku was killed off. Now that Anakin had successfully saved them, he was interested in how he could proactively aid the Republic, and perhaps marry the woman of his dreams. Padme, though, had a lot of psychological treatment to undergo. It was hard to sleep at night, when she was used to waking night terrors shared with her bunkmate. Anakin had to be understanding, and he actually would be. Instead of pressing her, he learned a really cool concept called consent. He'd be supportive of both Amidala and Kenobi on their individual healing journeys, while also becoming the head of operations for Outer Rim dealings. The Council, because of Anakin's influence, requested a chance to move into the Outer Rim with CSF support. This request went through Anakin to the Senate, which they obliged to. The Jedi had unfinished business, and Skywalker, as director, was offered a distant seat on the Council, as the youngest counselor in Order history. Of course he took it. His adoration and love for Padme still existed, and he would wait, being supportive, because he had no problem with that. This push for Outer Rim control actually brought the neutral systems and the Confederacy closer together with the Republic. The CSF was permitted to work in neutral territory under the banner of justice, so uprisings like the one seen on Concordia from Death Watch would see clone special forces gutting Mandalorian warriors. These clones were pretty unstoppable too, especially compared to Outer Rim grunts. It'd be a couple years of loose conflict, skirmishes really, because conquering territory required regs to do some stationary work, but in the long run, it would see a truly unified galaxy. When Anakin reached his late 20s, with a head full of hair and a nice beard, he would finally get his chance. After 8 full years of service to the Republic and the Jedi Order, he'd step down as director of the CSF, handing the position over to his most trusted ally, Central General Gascon. The clones by this point were filtering out for human soldiers, which was difficult, but Gascon and Gregor led rigorous regimental training for wannabe CSF agents on Borovio, and also at the Yavin Sanctuary that was rebuilt after the Republic took Hutt space. Patience was a gift, and after years of being in Padme's corner supporting her through her healing journey, they would eventually tie the knot in secrecy. Truthfully speaking, the Jedi Council didn't really care. The Chosen One had brought balance to the Force. They could turn a blind eye to this, because instead of actually doing this in secrecy from the Jedi, they were encouraged by the Order. Anakin did what he was trained to do. The Force was restored to balance. The galaxy was unified. The Jedi were more adored than ever before, so they wanted Anakin to get his happy ending, even if it didn't align with their code. They could make an exception, and so for Anakin, after a life of service, would finally have the life of his dreams, while remaining a council member, a hero, and a figure forever remembered by the Republic and the Jedi. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. I've got a Mission Impossible video up on Penti Patrol Cinema, go check that out. It's pretty awesome. The new Mission Impossible's out, so, you know, spy theme is kind of the theme here. So, spy here, spy there, go check it out. Anyways, let's talk about this story. So, this all had to start at Geonosis. I'm not gonna lie, that's probably my favorite sequence I've written for Geonosis. It's just, I don't know, it felt kind of right. Having Anakin interact with the commandos and saving them from catastrophic death. I think that's also the only way that Anakin would gain control over this, and that's the only event where so many commandos would be affected by it. A big juncture in the story is how you perceive Dooku's dealing with Anakin. I wanted that to be ambiguous, because Tyrannus targeting Anakin just comes so far to left field. He's targeting that base to destroy the Clone Underground operation, which is the CSF. You could also see this as Dooku getting rid of Anakin because he sees him as a threat to his own growth as a Sith. More or less, what I wanted to do with this story is I wanted to show Anakin's evolution as a military director. Something that I think we don't really talk about at all is how, talented he was as a military leader. He kind of falls into that line really comfortably in Clone Wars. Obviously, in the show, they literally said they turn him into Han Solo for the show. And so that's kind of him here. He's just being the guy's guy. And I think he would do that really well with one Gascon by his side, also Plo by his side, and Imogen D, but also just being around the elite units. You know, I think he would be upset that he doesn't get to see as much combat, but I think he would thrive a lot. Because he's directing, he's leading people to victory. And I think the CSF, as depicted in the story, would be a very successful operation of clones, especially under Anakin's control, because he would force them to go as hard as possible and even go around protocol just to get the mission done right. So I hope you all enjoyed. Don't forget, go check out that PPC video. It is fucking sick. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.